Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. China accuses the US of economic bullying and destabilizing the world's economies as US stock markets do begin to rally. The US and Iran confirm nuclear talks will take place in Oman this weekend. And Prince Harry arrives at the Court of Appeal in London as he challenges his right for taxpayer protection. Now to our top story. And President Trump has responded to China's accusations of economic bullying. Writing on Truth Social, the US president said China wants to make a deal badly, but they don't know how to get started. It comes as the US market opened more positively this morning, with the S&P 500 rising to 3.3%, the tech-heavy Nasdaq 100 growing 3.6%, while the Dow Jones was up 3.3%. I'm now joined by Ruby Osman, policy advisor and China expert at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Ruby, great to have you on the show. So Donald Trump started another day with a Truth Social post mocking China. Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry has accused the US of economic bullying. Are the world's two largest economies heading into a tit-for-tat trade war? And how concerning is this rhetoric?
I think it is pretty concerning. I think the challenge we have at the moment is both sides think the other one is in a weaker position, and that really does raise the risk of escalation. I think the US thinks China has made a mistake in responding quite so forcefully and so quickly, and that China risks being a global outlier when other countries are trying to negotiate with the US. But I think from China's side, they think what the US has done is an act of self-sabotage, and they think this is going to make China look like a more credible partner in comparison. And both of them are making their policies accordingly. And the second you add in the sort of domestic audiences that on both sides are expecting a strong response, I think in the immediate term, the off-ramps aren't that clear.
So the real question, though, is if the US does indeed impose this extra 50% tariff tomorrow, what could or would China possibly do next?
It's a great question. I think China's going to have to fight it on two fronts. And so we've already seen some countermeasures proposed, and interestingly, they go beyond the realm of tariffs into things like fentanyl cooperation, into things like IP, even into potentially banning US films in China. But I also think the other key area of focus for China is going to be the rest of the world. And I think 54% tariffs on China were not a surprise. This is similar to what President Trump was threatening on the campaign trail. What is a surprise is quite how high tariffs are on the rest of the world. Trump thinks China is the main offender when it comes to trade imbalances, but actually, he's also put very high tariffs on some of those countries like Vietnam, like Japan, that the US has traditionally seen as counterweights to China's influence. And so I think for China, another priority will be making sure that it builds common ground with those countries and that those countries aren't pressured into potentially curbing their ties with China in exchange for concessions from the US on tariff rates.
So China is really the only nation in the world at the moment that is choosing to take a stand against Trump's tariffs. We are waiting for a response from the EU. Will Europe's retaliation be a crucial turning point for the Trump administration's tariff push if that does come into force?
Yeah, I think the EU is going to be a really interesting place to watch, because obviously if you have both the EU and China come out fighting, that does put the US in quite a difficult position. Alternatively, if the EU does go more along the negotiations route, China risks being the only major power who's really come out in force. And I think also Europe is going to be a really good example of another challenge China is going to face, which is like, yes, the EU shares China's opinion that these trade tariffs are unfair, but the EU will also be thinking about, they'll also be concerned about this potential influx of cheap Chinese goods that we're going to see as Chinese exporters have to find new markets. And so I think that's going to be a challenge that comes up again and again for China, and the EU is going to be a really good example of that.
The Chinese government has really deep pockets, let's be honest, and state companies are vowing to buy stocks to stabilise the market. How crucial is this government intervention at such a time of uncertainty for China?
I think it's going to be really important. I think the area where we're going to see a lot of focus in is how to boost domestic demand. If China can unlock that, it can mitigate some of the worst elements of this escalation in the trade wars. I would say from Beijing's perspective, the good news is it will probably take a while for Chinese consumers to feel the brunt of the tariffs. You know, what China tends to import from the US is more manufacturing parts rather than sort of your everyday consumer goods. And that's a key difference to the US, where actually they're buying Chinese toys, Chinese clothing, Chinese electronics. I think consumers will feel the brunt much quicker. But the trickier challenge, right, is that Beijing's already dealing with weak consumer confidence. Boosting that is going to be key to unlocking domestic demand, but it's going to be really tricky when your country is trapped in a trade war.
Ruby Osman, policy advisor and China expert at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Absolutely great to have your insights. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks.
Let's get the latest financial reaction from Head of Money and Markets at Hargreaves Lansdown. That's Susannah Streeter. Susannah, thank you so much for joining me. So after a wild week of swings, we have seen somewhat of a recovery in the markets across the world today. Are traders starting to hope for a trade deal, do you think?
I think there's two things. What we're seeing is that investors are going bargain hunting, trying to buy into beaten up stocks because of these really sharp falls that we've seen over recent days. But also there is some relief, I think, flooding through the market that negotiations appear to be on the table. So President Trump on Truth Social, his preferred method of communication, the platform, he's posted to say that actually negotiations from officers' negotiations from countries are coming thick and fast. Around 70 countries are thought to be wanting to negotiate with the United States. And so there does appear to be a window of opportunity opening. And so some of the worst fears that really rattled markets over the last couple of days may be allayed a little. However, some of the gains that we saw in Europe and the United States today have been pared back. There's still an awful lot of uncertainty around.
So like you say, we are still seeing volatility. The Nikkei in Japan ended trading up 6% today, and the yen actually has also shown some strength. Why do you think this is a glimmer of hope when we're looking at the markets?
One of the reasons why the yen has shown strength is because it's considered to be a safe haven asset at a time of high uncertainty, like the Swiss franc as well. And that's why you've seen some strengthening in the yen. Yes, as well, the Nikkei, that regained some ground, quite considerable ground during trading in the session. And I think that's partly because of the standpoint of Japan. It's taking this stance where it's going to opt for talks first and keep retaliatory action in its back pocket. Similar stance really being put forward by South Korea, the European Union, the UK. And I think because of that, because we're not seeing a potential escalation all the way around the world, and it's concentrated mainly in China, that there are hopes that there will be this negotiation and there will be some better deals put on the table for the US's trading partners.
So European drinks makers like Diageo and AB InBev, which are the makers of popular brands like Johnnie Walker, made broad gains this morning. Why is this, and what is behind the boost? And once again, just concentrating on the point you just said to me, does it prove negotiation is kind of key?
It is absolutely key. And what the European Union has done is actually they've excluded bourbon, US bourbon, from the potential list of products that they may slam tariffs on if there is really no result from the talks that it wants to embark on with the United States. Now, the reason why it's done that is because Trump has said that actually he could slam even further tariffs on the European Union's drinks industry, particularly its wine and spirits industry. And it accounts for something like 1.6 billion of exports. That's the hit that could result if these types of products are hit with further tariffs. Now, because the EU has exempted US bourbon from the tariffs, there are hopes that actually there is an escape route for all of these companies who are really reliant on trade with the United States. And that's why you've seen these gains today.
So company earnings are just around the corner, but with all this uncertainty over the tariffs, where does this leave the world's big firms and also businesses? Because no one is really clear right now what is really going to happen in the next few days or the next few weeks.
No, but if there are resilient earnings that come through, that at least will show that firms are in a good position to weather a tariff storm. So that may provide a little bit more optimism. But certainly, you're right. There is so much uncertainty around about exactly where these tariffs are going to hurt in the medium to longer term. We know that there are tariffs being imposed on various sectors, but because there could still be room for negotiation, it's very difficult to see exactly what the long-term repercussions are going to be. There is inevitably going to be a hit to global growth in some way. It depends on just how deep. But all of this tariff talk is very disconcerting for the US consumer. And we've already seen consumer confidence really dented. And so it's going to take time for that to build up. And because of that, they're likely to tighten their purse strings and not spend so much. And that could really affect earnings going forward.
Head of Money and Markets at Hargreaves Lansdown, Susannah Streeter, brilliant to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me. Iran has confirmed it will hold talks with the US over its nuclear program following President Trump's White House announcement. The Iranian foreign minister took to social media to say the indirect talks will take place in Oman on Saturday between himself and US envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. We can now speak to Jason Brodsky, Policy Director of United Against Nuclear Iran. Jason, great to have you on the show. So Donald Trump announced the US and Iran were set to have these high-level nuclear talks in Oman, but Iran's foreign minister has somewhat contradicted this. What more do we know?
Well, it's great to be with you. I think the Iranians are portraying these talks as indirect, while the United States is portraying these talks as direct. And I think that there's going to be a collision of styles, if you will, between the Iranians and the U.S. delegation. The Iranian delegation prefers long, slow talks to run out the clock on the negotiation process and to drag it out as it feels it buys time for the Islamic Republic. The Trump administration, on the other hand, prefers swifter, quicker negotiating processes, and that sets the stage for, I think, some tension down the line.
Jason, how important are these nuclear talks in Oman in mending the already deteriorated relationship between Iran and the US? And as we know, America has been targeting Iranian-backed groups in the Middle East.
Well, I think they are important in the sense that there is a date coming up on the calendar in October 2025 when the snapback sanctions mechanism under UN Security Council Resolution 2231 expires. So there is going to be a forcing mechanism for the United States and its other allies and partners to make a decision as to diplomacy with the Islamic Republic and the invocation of that snapback sanctions mechanism, which would restore the previous UN Security Council resolutions against Tehran that were temporarily suspended with the creation of the JCPOA in 2015.
Tehran has always maintained that it's not seeking a nuclear weapon, but on the other hand is enriching uranium using these very sophisticated centrifuges. Does the world actually know how close Iran is to weapons grade at all?
Well, yes, I think that the United States and its allies have a sense of what is happening with Iran's nuclear program through a combination of sources. Also, the International Atomic Energy Agency is one, and also the U.S. intelligence community, as well as the intelligence community of its allies and partners, is another mechanism through which the U.S. has some visibility into the Iranian nuclear program. But the Iranian regime is very close, and we are closer than ever to potential military action against the Islamic Republic's nuclear program, given their advances.
Trump withdrew from the 2015 nuclear agreement between Iran and world powers, which did place these strict curbs on Tehran's nuclear activities, and that was really for sanctions relief. What is the US going to try to achieve with these talks with Iran? Are they going to drop sanctions? What exactly is Trump wanting?
Well, this is where we're also going to have some tension with the Iranians. The Iranians are thinking that they can lure the United States into a nuclear deal that resembles the JCPOA with some minor modifications. However, the Trump administration has been very public in insisting on Iran dismantling its entire nuclear program. So that means enrichment, strategic missiles, and weaponization. And those are two very different paradigms. And so when we talk about a deal, the details matter. And for now, both sides are talking past one another as to their demands.
Jason, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but how do you think these talks are going to go? Do you think that there's going to be any movement?
I'm very skeptical. I think that the Iranians are trying to buy time, and they are grand masters at dragging out these negotiations leading to nowhere. Let's not forget what happened in 2021 and 2022 when there were also indirect negotiations, and the Biden administration was spending months in Vienna with the Iranians, negotiating indirectly with European mediators running through the streets of Vienna, trying to conclude the negotiating process, but Tehran repeatedly refused a deal. And so these are similar tactics that are likely to be employed here to try to drag out the process and try to thwart any invocation of the snapback sanctions mechanism that I previously described, and also to try to avoid any kind of military action against the Islamic Republic.
Jason Brodsky, Policy Director of United Against Nuclear Iran. Great speaking to you. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Ukrainian Prime Minister Volodymyr Zelensky says 2 Chinese soldiers have been captured whilst fighting in eastern Ukraine. China has been accused of assisting Russia in the war against Ukraine. Zelensky says he has ordered an explanation from Beijing. South Korea will head to the polls on the 3rd of June for a snap presidential election, triggered by the removal of impeached leader Yoon Suk-yeol. Leaders contending have started to throw their hats into the ring today. Opposition leader Ye Mung is the current frontrunner in the polls. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister has arrived in the US to meet with government officials. The trip comes ahead of President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia later this spring. Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud is expected to discuss Gaza and the Houthis. And a newborn baby has become the first child in the UK to be born via a donated womb. The infant's mum received her sister's womb in a pioneering operation in 2023. The miracle child, named Amy after her aunt, was born to London mum Grace Davidson and weighed just over 2 kilos. Now, the Trump administration says it will fine migrants under deportation orders $998 a day if they fail to leave the United States. The move follows the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to back President Trump's use of a wartime law allowing the removal of alleged gang members. The 1798 Alien Enemies Act had been questioned by a lower court who had attempted to block flights carrying groups of Venezuelan migrants to a jail in El Salvador. Trump has called the ruling a great day for justice in America. I'm now joined by Angie Wong, Miami GOP Committeewoman. Angie, great to have you on the show again. So Trump says a great day for justice, according to himself, but these deportees will still get their chance to appeal their removal, won't they?
Yes, that is right. The Supreme Court had recently ruled 5-4, where it greenlights Trump's deportation plans, although the plaintiff, the ACLU, is also able to refile in the right venue, which is in Texas. They had filed in a Washington, D.C. court, and the Supreme Court had caught them on a technicality and gave the win to Trump just based on a technicality in our legal system.
You've previously called these migrants dangerous individuals. What evidence is there that they've actually committed crimes? Many of them don't have US criminal records, and this is according to court documents used by ICE.
Well, many of them don't because, well, over 10 million illegals have crossed our borders since the Biden administration. And there is a handful, a large percentage, that have committed crimes. And it is documented all over our cities, especially in New York City, California, even here in Florida, where I am. It ranges anything from petty crimes all the way to killings. And we have seen videos last year, right before the big presidential election. One of the main issues and platforms that Republicans were running on were some of these illegal migrants killing Americans and American students. So that was a big problem. So it does exist. It's now we want people to enter our country the right way. We want them to file and come into America's the right way. And I think that has always been the American dream, is to come here and to start a life, but you have to do it like everybody else, and you have to do it legally.
Angie, the Trump administration is planning to fine migrants who are under deportation orders $998 a day if they fail to leave the US. How is this going to be enforced?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think the Trump administration is using every available tool available to them to deport or regulate those who are already here. They're already canceling student visas. They're using the World War II acts, as the SCOTUS ruling had pointed out. These are campaign promises. What is really interesting about all of this is that these are laws that are already on the books. It's just that Joe Biden and his administration never enforced laws that already exist in the U.S. To use for migration. They completely ignored it and allowed millions of illegals in. It's a shame that the Trump administration has to waste time, money, and energy to fight laws that are already there. So this is what's happening right now. Democrats are using every available tool they have, which is really just the courts at this point, to delay the inevitable, which is the deportation of a lot of these migrants, or well, essentially, I don't know, even if they do try to collect $900 a day from illegals, I'm not sure how that would be collectible if they don't have bank accounts or anything like that.
So, Angie, you actually live in Florida, where there is a big Latino community. How are these deportations going down? Are people in support of them, or have we seen a backlash at all?
Yeah, no, it's been a big concern, actually. Even before Trump was inaugurated, there's been a lot of talk amongst Republicans here because, this is not a MAGA one-size-fits-all policy. We have a very large Latino community. There are illegals here, and that's always been part of the fabric, especially in where I am in Miami. So we have been hearing stories about how children are in school one day and there are empty seats next to them the next, and we're not sure if they're deported. We have been seeing the ICE buses roll into neighborhoods and removing family members. And those are all being echoed back to our congressional members that we can't stand for this. We did not essentially vote for this. And I think that is something that we're keeping an eye on for the midterm elections, because this one size fits all, deport everybody, well, it doesn't really work here in Southern Florida. And I am keeping an eye on it. I'm afraid that it's going to cost us a couple of votes here, especially in South Florida. I wish that there was a way to work around. I know that, our congressional members are trying to work with the Trump administration to have some allowances, and we'll keep an eye on all of this.
Angie Wong, Miami GOP Committeewoman, great to have you back on the show. Once again, thank you.
Thank you again.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The US Health Department will organise a panel of experts to discuss fluoride in drinking water. The mineral is currently added to tap water to strengthen tooth enamel and to promote dental health, but has been a highly discussed issue in some states for decades. Health Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. opposes the addition of fluoride in public water systems. Vietnam says it will buy American weapons and other goods to make up for a trade gap that has led to the imposition of huge tariffs. The Southeast Asian country has asked for a 45-day delay in imposing the 46% tariffs levied by the Trump administration. At least 22 people have died after flash flooding and tornado damage swept across the Midwest and south of the United States over the weekend. Half the reported deaths, including children and the elderly, were in Tennessee. Around 9 million residents have been under a flood watch warning. King Charles and Queen Camilla have released new pictures to mark their 20th wedding anniversary. The British royal couple marked the milestone whilst on a state visit to Italy. The trip was originally supposed to include the Vatican, but remains postponed due to the Pope's health condition. Now, Prince Harry was back in court in London today, appealing a decision which downgraded his security in the UK. The Duke of Sussex stepped back as a working royal in 2020, affecting his taxpayer-funded protection. The hearing at the Court of Appeal is expected to last for 2 days. Sarah Firth has the latest.
Prince Harry stepping out of his car and back into the UK spotlight today as he arrives at the Royal Courts of Justice. A tense smile and brief wave as he dodges the inevitable questions.
Are you going to visit your dad, Harry? Harry, are you going to go and see the King? Are you going to speak to your dad?
King Charles's younger son back home and back in court. This time, he's appealing a decision made in 2020 that he would not automatically receive personal police security whilst in Britain. That decision came after the Prince and wife Meghan split with the royal family and left the UK. They're now settled in California and have founded a charitable foundation, amongst other endeavours. Since relocating to North America, Prince Harry's visits back home have been few and far between. Court appearances as the Prince takes on the British tabloids in separate legal battles about privacy and information gathering. And Harry and his wife Meghan returned upon the death of his grandmother, the Queen. Today marking another sombre return with the Prince back in court as this two-day hearing gets underway. Sarah Firth, Al Arabiya News.
Let's take a look at the top business news. Clothing retailers across the US are delaying orders and have a freeze on hiring after tariff hikes affected products imported from Vietnam and China. Businesses like Nike and Lululemon face offsetting the cost of tariffs by raising prices by 40%, potentially damaging sales or absorb the cost increase and further strain already thin profit margins. Gold surged to a high of over $3,167 per troy ounce last week. Analysts have drawn comparisons with the last political and economic turmoil, which were the main driver of record prices back in 1980. But market players say the nature of this rally looks more sustainable, as big powers look unlikely to resolve issues such as tariffs, which has driven interest in gold as a safe haven from a risk. Turning to the sports news now, defending champion Scotty Scheffler is the man to beat at this week's Masters, where Rory McIlroy is making his 11th and perhaps best shot at completing the career Grand Slam. Much of the excitement ahead of this year's tournament does revolve around the two best players in the world. The opening round is scheduled to begin on Thursday. And former Australian batter Will Brodsky has retired from cricket at the age of 27, saying he doesn't want to risk doing any more damage to his brain after repeated concussions. He made one test appearance, scoring 62 against India in Sydney in 2021. He has suffered 12 known concussions during his career and last played competitively in March 2024. A reminder of our top stories. China accuses the US of economic bullying and destabilizing the world's economies as US stock markets do begin to rally. The US and Iran confirm nuclear talks will take place in Oman this weekend. And Prince Harry arrives at the Court of Appeal in London as he challenges his right for taxpayer protection. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next. That's followed by Hadley Gamble's interviews with Morgan Ortegos, Deputy US Special Envoy to the Middle East, and the economic historian Dan Yergin. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye.